I spent 4 or 5 years really studying happiness in depth. It was my specialist subject at university. It was where I did some research. I coached a lot of people. I even wrote my first book, First Face North, which is all about um, happiness. And fundamentally, my understanding now is that happiness is essentially the freedom to grow into yourself. So it's not the freedom to be yourself and do whatever whims that you want, but it's to follow your own journey and make the choices that make you happier, wiser, kinder, to lead a more meaningful life. And so that means we have to be free to make our choices. It means that we have to make the choices that aren't based on instant gratification, which will bring you pleasure, but on long-term happiness. And in relationship heaven and relationship hell, I talked about the essence of a happy relationship or is one that's based on freedom, and a relationship hell is based on control. So I want to talk to you now about the ThinkFree Rebellion and why that's a critical part for your personal individual happiness and for your relationship success. So I want to show you this graphic, and this graphic is really showing that we are born with a blueprint. There's a DNA, there's a genetic makeup that determines our temperament, our intelligence. Most of the factors that make us are genetic, that are then expressed in the environment. So how that set of genes is going to show up is determined on the culture, the environment, and the experiences that you've had, because they enable the opportunities. And so there's a potential that you can become. And so I think there's a path. It's not a specific destiny that I must do this job and I must marry this person, I must do this. But there's a sense of an environment that you're going to thrive in, that you're going to be your best self, that you're going to be happy, and you're going to be the best version of yourself. And then there's other environments where you're going to be less happy, less true. And so life really is about making the decisions, making the choices, and growing into that zone of love and happiness. So what we need to look at is, why do we get swayed off course? Because what happens for a lot of people is they won't make love and happiness. They'll maybe get stuck in fear or in shame or in anger or in despair, or feel apathetic. So what is it that sways them off course? So I want to explain something. Well, I want to look at the airline industry. So planes follow a similar trajectory, that they have a start position, then they have a destination that they're going on, and all the time they're swaying off course. In the airline industry, they have the 1 in 60 rule, and that is that for every 60 miles an aeroplane travels, for every 1 degree it's off, it will be a mile off its destination. So James Clear in Atomic Habits talks about, if an aeroplane sets off from Los Angeles and it's 4.5 degrees off, instead of landing in Washington, DC, it will land in New York. In the same way, I think that this is what happens to us. If we're a little bit off, so for example, let's look at relationships. If we're a little bit off in how we show up, if we're a little bit off in the partner that we choose and in the interaction of how they show up, and if we're a little bit off in the way that we build the relationship, suddenly we've gone from a loving, lasting relationship to one that we can't bear to be in anymore, even one that's toxic. So we need to look at how do people get swayed off their path? And there's three real ways when I'm looking at this. And that is, the first one is dogma. And it's very easy to get swayed off by dogma. And dogma is not just religious, it's every political party, every government has an ideology. Every culture has ideologies, even from the media and from just where we work. They have an ideology. And so there's for example, okay, so when you look at engagement rings, it's about 75 to 80% of engagement rings are now diamond rings. And it's not, and we just take it as, when you get engaged, you buy a diamond ring. Well, actually, in 1930, there was only about 10% of engagement rings were diamond. So why is the jump? Well, what actually happened was, at the end of the 19th century, De Beers funded a lot of exploration and found this glut of diamonds. Now, at that time, there was no real use for diamonds, so there was no market for them. So they had these diamonds that were essentially worthless. And over about a 40-year period, they tried to find a market and to create a market from advertising. And so what they did was very clever, was they picked a generation of girls from about 15 to late 20s who were likely to be of marriageable age and likely to get proposed to. And they bombarded them with advertising that said, diamonds last forever. If your boyfriend proposes to you and it's not with a diamond, he doesn't think it's going to last forever. He's not serious about you. And so there was so much peer pressure, just general pressure, that girls felt they had to have a diamond engagement ring. And then there was a whole set of campaigns to the boys, telling them that love lasts forever, like a diamond. That isn't it worth 2 months of your wages? And so there became this custom that you should pay a couple of months worth of wages for an engagement ring. That was entirely manufactured, created, and maintained for the gain of De Beers. And so we went from 10% to about 75, 80% of engagement rings purely from a sustained advertising campaign. So there's many ways that we listen to dogma. When you look at political decisions, they're often made for some private gain. They're either an ideological, or there's some trade-off, or they're made with some gain that's not necessarily you. So, for example, many people believe that schools were set up to help factories. And so if you think about it, we lived like as farmers. Family lived, worked their farm, all helped out. So the kids were running wild. There wasn't really any sense of time, because people would go down to market at whenever. People didn't have appointments in the same way. And so with the Industrial Revolution, you had factories setting up, and so people moved to cities for work. And a factory needed people to clock on at 9 and clock off at 5. It needed them to sit there, to follow instructions, and to do boring, mindless work. And so that's believed to be the reason why school is set up as it is, with a teacher at the front, set times, people sitting in rows, learning to sit quietly, do as they're told. Because when you look at a school curriculum today, there's no relation to the challenges that our children face in their modern life. So there's all kinds of dogma. Everyone's advertising to us. Everyone's trying to sell us on fitting their ideas. Now, what happens is when we abdicate responsibility, when we say they're an authority, therefore I'm going to listen to what they say, I'm going to do what they think. Now, there are times when we want to find expertise, but we want it to be our decision. We want to understand the factors affecting our decision, but not abdicate the decision. And yet it's so easy to do because of our childhood and our conditioning. When the teacher's telling you shut up and be quiet, when people tell you that your idea is rubbish, when you get humiliated for sharing an idea, it becomes hard to stand out. It becomes much easier to follow the crowd. And so we do things that aren't in our best interest because someone else told us to. So dogma is the first trap we can fall into. The second one is dated maps, which is basically ignorance of not knowing, not working from reality. So if you have a GPS that's out of date, you go off course. In the same way, if the things that you believe, the things that you assume, the expectations you have are not based in reality, in truth, then we're going to go off course. And then the last one is drama. And so this is really about emotions. We get scared until we don't do things and we avoid things. And so we get off course from fear. We get tempted by shortcuts, by sirens, so particularly in relationships, people get into a relationship with someone because they're so pretty. They excuse bad behavior because someone's so fun, because they're so hot, because they're so good in bed. And we choose the wrong person because we go for the instant gratification versus the long-term, what's long-term going to be most satisfying to us. So I want to talk about the place of emotion and logic. So people tell me that my work is super logical, and sometimes it grates on people because they'll have this belief that they really believe and really want to be true, and then they become offended by something that I've said. And what this is really about is that the reason that we do things, our motivation is emotional. So we want a relationship, a loving relationship, so that we feel great. We want to be happy so that we feel so good. Everything that we do is about how we feel. And the way that we know we're on course or off course is by emotion, how we feel. Because when we try to make decisions, when we try to decide how something is from logic, we just go in a spiral of overthinking. So emotion is why we do something and how we keep score. However, where most people get lost is they make reasons of logistics of how you get somewhere, of what you have to do based on emotion. And so they do what they want to do. They want they want to believe something, and so they believe it even though it's not true, and they do it because they want to believe in it. And so they get off course because they're working on a completely different reality than there actually is. And this would be like having a GPS that took you down the prettiest road, or it sent you on the prettiest route, which might not lead you to the destination, but it was the prettiest route. And so emotion is a terrible reason to navigate the reasons of how you get there and how to course correct. That's where we need logic. Logic is about what are the logistical choices? What is the reality I'm really dealing with? Not what I wish I was dealing with, but what am I really dealing with? And how do I navigate that? So logic is the intermediary between what you want to feel and how you get there. So the ThinkFree Rebellion is about you thinking free of dogma, dated maps or ignorance and drama. And so it's thinking that is based on the best thinking that you can have to get you where you want to go. So the ThinkFree Rebellion is an individual choice. It's recognizing that the organizations that we have, whether it's government, whether it's an employer, whether it's church, whatever we have, these are all in service to the individual. Because if you look at society, if you look at the world, all there is people. And all of the organizations that we have, however big they are, however powerful the government seems, they're shared agreements that we have as the best way of managing ourselves. But what happens too often is that the tail wags the dog. We have to make our choices based on what's right for us, because the choices of society are what's right for the society. Society needs all of our agreement and approval and belief in order to exist, because otherwise there would be nothing. So this gets us to the real philosophical view. There has been traditionally a view that people are savages, that if you just left people to do, if you left people without any controls, without any laws, without any law and order, that they would just be lying, cheating, raping, stealing, pillaging, killing each other. And so we need strong rules keeping people penned in. But I believe that people are inherently good. People inherently want to be kind. And if you talk about this to people, if you ask them, when you're happy, when you feel full, when you feel like life's going well, do you ever want to hurt anyone? And you'll find most people find that they don't. The times when we can be at our worst is when we're below the line, when we're tired, when we're stressed, when we're afraid, when we feel controlled. And so people, it's a bias that we tend to think everyone else is different. And we look at the behavior of other people and we compare it to how we feel internally. But most people want to feel happy. Most people want to be kind, want to be a good person. And so happier people leads to a kinder world. The view of society is that there are an elite few who know best, whether they're the political leaders, kings, queens, or whatever authority in whatever field. And so whether they're working from whether they expressly talk about their ideology or not, they work from an ideology. There are people similarly qualified, similarly capable, who have a completely different ideology. So I think we have to take all views and make our own decisions. Strength is in diversity, which when you look at the worst decisions of society ever, it's come from something called groupthink, where the group of people making the decisions was too similar, that they all supported each other's views, strengthened each other's views, and so made terrible decisions. And so we're seeing now, I think when you look at the recent American election and the whole Trump drama, we're seeing how how social media is polarizing people, because the Trump believers, all they see is news and views that support their beliefs. All the opponents, all they see is news and views that support their beliefs. And so they both become more and more sure that they're right. and it just polarizes people, leading to wars. I think the time has come where we have the infrastructure of society, we have the basic agreements that we're able to be a society and yet take care of our individual needs. Because when you look at relationships, when there's a 55% failure rate of the most committed relationships of marriage, there's something systemically wrong. And it's because society doesn't train you in being happy. It doesn't train you in having a happy and healthy relationship, because that's not in its interests. And so we have to individually navigate through life making our own decisions. The core belief of the ThinkFree Rebellion is that each of us has to become the author of our own life.